Scripture this morning because there's a couple of things that stood out to me in the Scripture reading. And so I'm going to read it this morning, and then we'll get on with our lesson. Now, this is the second half of Paul's first missionary journey, so we're going to be talking about some of that in class. So, now it happened in Iconium that they went together to the synagogue of the Jews, and so spoke that a great multitude, both of the Jews and of the Greeks, believed. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren. Therefore they stayed there a long time, speaking boldly in the Lord, who was bearing witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands. But the multitude of the city was divided. Part sided with the Jews and part with the apostles. And when a violent attempt was made by both the Gentiles and Jews with their rulers to abuse and stone them, they became aware of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding region, and they were preaching the gospel there. And in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently, and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up and straight on your feet." And he leaped and walked. Now when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And then the priests of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitudes. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude crying out, saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God, who made the heaven, who made the earth, the sea, and all things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. But nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, and that he did good. He gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness." And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitudes from sacrificing to them. So then the Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing to be dead. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up, he went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. You know, this is one of the first instances in the Scriptures where the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We have a situation that the Jews, who considered the Gentiles dogs, didn't speak to them, didn't deal with them, didn't have anything to do with them, but they were so enraged at what Paul and Barnabas had to say, they had enough influence to stir them up to the point where they stoned Paul. Okay? Now, how does somebody that, oh, that's loud. How does somebody that you don't have any dealings with, historically, there's a hatred between the two groups, and yet they can have enough influence to sway you to the point where you will murder someone, okay? And I'm just going to leave it at that and let that soak in, because we're going to get to it here in a little bit, but the devil has influence in this world. The devil has strong influence in this world, and it's a considerable force, as we can see, and we have examples in the Scriptures. But now we'll get on to the lesson. And we're talking about a church that sees. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But has anybody ever ridden in a car with a toddler? I love riding in the car with a toddler. They are just so excited just to be in the car, and then everything they see is they're just so excited.
We went to Dallas once with two of our grandkids, and it's getting dark, so the lights were everywhere. They were just like touching.
Right? It's just crazy. Now my oldest son, JT, you guys all should all know him. He was a great car rider. His favorite thing was school bus. He didn't call it a school bus. He had a different word for it, but his favorite thing was a school bus. And I don't like it when the kids kick the back of your seat, but this was the times that I would let him kick the back of my seat. School buses and Mercedes-Benz. I was working on Mercedes-Benz at the time, and he was just enamored with cars. He would come in the showroom and he would just touch all the cars. And we had Oldsmobile Buick, GMC trucks, and Mercedes-Benz. And the salesman just loved for him to come because he would come touch this car, and that's an Oldsmobile. And he'd come touch this car, and that's a Mercedes. And he knew all the cars. Well, he was riding with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law in town in Eufaula, just going, driving, whatever. I don't know where they were going, what they were doing. He's, Grandma, Mercedes. She didn't believe him. She made my father-in-law drive all the way around the block and come back, and sure enough, it's a Mercedes. Okay, we pass by stuff we just don't see anymore. But toddlers, kids, they just see and hear and recognize everything, and it's just it's funny because the 8th school bus or the 8th Mercedes has just as much excitement for a toddler as that first one did. They don't get bored with it very quick. They're very excited about it. So that allows us to get taught lessons from toddlers, and that's something we're not used to, but we can learn a lesson from toddlers. Awareness is a vital trait that the church should have. Awareness is something that helps the church spread, because awareness helps us see. And it's actually, the definition is actually, it's a deliberate act of seeing. Awareness is a deliberate act of seeing. So what we see around us, or even through the eyes of a child, is an invitation to follow God's movement or join him in an opportunity to lift up Jesus. And we can see that Paul and Barnabas were sent on their missionary journey, and they saw an opportunity to preach in all the cities that they went to. But there's also, we can see, or we can feel, or we can, I don't know what it is. Is anybody afraid of the dark? Nobody in here. Has anybody in here ever been afraid of the dark, even when they were little? Yeah. Because you can't see, okay? And you get that, it's a fear. You get that fear because you can't see, okay? A lot of times we get a fear because we can't see where God is leading us. We can't see where we're going. We can't force ourselves to be aware that God is working with us and has power in our lives. And so, and that feeling, I don't, and I'm getting that same feeling right now because I'm about to tell you a story that the hair stood up on the back of my neck and on my arms for no reason. Okay, it's not, I say for no reason, for no understandable reason. I was just driving home. I was out 16. I was almost to where the old salvage yard was there on 16. I don't know if you guys know where that's at. I was just driving by, and a big cat, like mountain lion size cat, like a big cat with a big curved tail, black. I don't know what kind of cat it was, but just the sight of that big black cat going across the road in front. I mean, it was from here to, I don't know, maybe even to the car wash, not maybe that far, but enough that I could see it. Went in front of me, and I got that for no reason. I wasn't scared of the cat. I wasn't scared of the cat. Excuse me. I didn't have any real fear of what I saw, but my body reacted in such a way that I got that hair up on me. And it still does. When I think about it, I get that. It's so bizarre. But what we see can have an effect on us in different degrees and in different ways. And so it can warn us about danger. You know, you've all got that, you know, you've been, you know, something just doesn't feel right. Just doesn't feel right. And so it also not only can warn us of danger, but it can also bring out a compassion in our hearts. Something that we see, and the media will do that to you. You know, everybody's seen the dog commercials, you know, where they're filming those dogs in the worst conditions imaginable, and that touches your heart from what you see. You know, if you don't watch the commercial, if you just listen to the commercial, it really doesn't have much of an effect on you because you don't see what they're talking about. But seeing what someone's speaking of can have an effect and have a compassion and a sadness or and so that's kind of what we're talking about this morning. So how we see is very important. You know, we can see with a hardened heart. We can see with a skeptical mind. You know, I don't believe that, or I just, you know, it's all show, or it's all theatrics, or it's all, you know, and we have to go work through it in our minds, you know, to determine for ourselves the truth or the falsehood or the need or the greed or, you know, all of those things. And we see it with, especially in our day and time and in this area, with the homeless people. With the guys that stand on the street corner begging for money with a sign. You know, I don't know that they're homeless. I don't know their situation. I've never taken the opportunity to stop and talk to one of them. You know, I can tell you that I see the same ones in the same place for weeks and weeks and weeks, carrying the same gas can with the same sign, and, you know, seeing that breeds skepticism in me. And so seeing is the deliberate act of focusing our eyes and hearts, and the focus we're talking about this morning is on the movement of God, watching what God does in our lives, in the world around us, in our friends, in our family, in our family here, our congregation, and our church family, the church universal, worldwide. And so focus. So a church that spreads, and that's what the lessons have been about, is a church that sees. So Paul and Barnabas, they're on their missionary journey, and they've and we've talked about this in previous lessons, authority. You know, they've submitted to God's authority. They've surrendered themselves to what God would have them to do, and they're doing it. Okay, and what they're doing gives us a vision of what we should be doing. You know, it gives us an example of the hardships that we'll see, the hardships that the devil brings to bear against God's people. Because you have groups that will not even associate with one another, banding together to kill these two men for talking. And that's all they've done. You know, they've just voiced the truth. They've voiced the gospel, Now, they've backed it up with miracles, with the guy we saw the cripple walk. And that's a threat, okay? That's a perceived threat. And the devil works in us the same way today. He's just as strong, he's just as active today as he was then. And he's very convincing. He's convinced me that all those people with the sign are just scammers, okay? Now, that does not allow me the vision or being able to see the ones that actually need the help, okay? So they have, and I'm going to say the devil has blinded me to the need of the homeless based on my cynicism of the ones that I see all the time. And we do that as a church. We do that as a disciple of Christ. Our cynicism to someone's, our definition of someone's lifestyle, our definition of what we, our perception of how people live and the situation they get themselves in, okay? The things that they do have consequences, and those consequences and the things that they do make us cynical just as people, but also as God's people. And this is confession time, so I tend to discount their need for Christ. Not their need. I decide for them whether they want Jesus in their life. Okay? I've already made that decision for them based on their actions, or based on my perception of their actions, that they're not willing to accept Christ. They have no desire, and this is before I even know if they've ever even heard the name of Jesus. And I've already made that assumption. I've already made that distinction, and I've already let the devil persuade me to cost them their soul. And it was so simple. It was just so simple. And it's eye-opening when you see that in yourself. And so we need to be aware. And that awareness needs to be not only that to the people that are receptive, even to the people that are not receptive. We can see Paul stayed a long time because they wouldn't listen. Okay? Paul didn't stay a long time because he was converting people, and the church was spreading and everything was good, and flowers and rainbows. Okay? Paul and Barnabas stayed a long time because there was work to do, because the devil was working against them just as hard as they were working. And so there was discord, and there was and all those things. So their vision of the community they were dealing with helps us see the community we're dealing with, okay? And we don't have it near as hard as what they do. So they go on their first missionary journey, and then they're coming back, and they are very aware, and they talk about God's movement in the communities they're dealing with. So in 14:1, a great number of Jews and Gentiles believe. God, and in 14:3, God empowers Paul and Barnabas to speak boldly for the Lord. He enables them to do miraculous signs and wonders in 3. He protects them from harm in 6. He allows them to see faith of the crippled man in 9. He heals the crippled man. God heals the crippled man in 10. We can see how God has moved in the lives of Paul and Barnabas, that they respond in humility and grief They respond in humility and grief at the way the community treats them. Okay? They don't respond in anger and disdain. They respond in humility and grief at the way they're treated. And we see God in the hearts of the disciples that when they gather around Paul when they think he's dead outside the city. And in 20 we see where God protected Paul and spared his life. And we don't have the details to that. I don't know how common stoning was. I've seen reenactments of stoning, and it's not what my mind's eye saw when it came to stoning. You're thinking, maybe baseball-sized rock, something's easy to throw, something like that, and that's not how it was. I mean, you're talking big rocks, take a man 2 hands to hold, and slamming down on a person's body that's been, already hit enough times with rocks that they're either knocked out or knocked down, and just crushing them under the blows of these stones. And so, and Paul just bounces right back up. We read in the scriptures that the next day the disciple, he was still alive, which, if you think about what stoning is, and you think about the people that did the stoning, which they had done stonings before, it's not something that they were new to. The people that did the stoning were convinced he was dead, to the point where they drug what they thought was the dead body out of the city and left it outside. And yet, so he had to been hurt enough that they thought he was dead. And then they took him back to the disciples took him back to the city, and then the next day he was traveling again. So, we can see God working in Paul in a physical sense in how Paul lived his life. And so God protected Paul and spared his life. So a church that spreads is a church that keeps its eyes on God. Okay? Our focus is our Lord, is His will in our lives. And with open eyes, we walk around every day, and we can look for, and we can find, and we can see God moving in the world around us. Okay? Just as easily as we can see Satan, if we look for it, moving in the world around us. So we need to watch for the ways that God intersects with our lives. Okay? We need to remember that God loves us. We need to remember that God's love is working in us. We need to remember that God is working for us. And that's sometimes, we get discouraged, and we're a why me generation. We get discouraged, and we don't want to know why, and we forget all of the good that God does in our lives every day, and that Satan likes for us to focus on the bad. Satan will bring the bad to the forefront of our mind, to the forefront of our awareness, to try to diminish God's power in the world, to try to diminish God's influence in our lives. And discouragement is a strong, strong weapon in the devil's arsenal. He moves to bless us each and every day, and he moves to draw us closer. And how he does that, is in gatherings like this morning. We become closer together when we understand that we each fight the same fight, just at different levels, in different arenas, in different ways, with different tools, and yet we're not in this fight alone. We help each other in that fight, and we should look to help each other, become aware to help each other. It's the most difficult thing to ask for help. I don't know why we live in that society. I don't know why and men especially, it's a difficult, crushing thing to ask for help. Right. We're not raised to ask for help. And so I don't know why it's such a difficult thing to ask our family for help, for assistance, for prayer, for action in our lives that help us be a better version of who we should be. And so we need to live with our eyes open. We need to learn to see God's movement in our lives. It's the root of our faith. God's alive today. His movement in the world is the root of our faith. We need to live not like we generally live. Because most days we walk through our lives content to focus on what we see around us. Okay? Our mind is full of things. It's crowded and weighed down with the things that the devil wants us to see. Okay? With our work and our family and the world and politics and the weather and just all the myriad of things that just swarm our minds. But we need to live different from what we allow the devil to show us that we see. We need to move our focus from the physical things that we see to the spiritual things, the blessings of God that will uplift us, and those things are I tell my wife all the time, in 100 years it won't matter. You know what? In 100 years it won't matter that glass broke. It won't matter that carpet's pulling loose. It won't matter that board squeaked. In 100 years it won't matter. But in 100 years, this will matter. Because what we do now, how we raise our children, how we spread the gospel, how we portray God to those around us in our workplace, in our family, in just in the people we see every day. 100 years ago, that mattered. Because 100 years, we're here, and we're now. And so 100 years from now, this will matter. And so we need to remember that, because God works through us. And so we have that hope in a world we haven't seen. And so His presence is with us. And those are the things we need to not only see, but be aware of. We need to open our mind, open our eyes to the things that God blesses us with each day. So counting our blessings is a powerful way to start seeing God at work in our lives. Okay? So not only do we need to see God and see His movement in our lives, we need to see the adversary. God's people must be aware of the enemy that seeks to draw us away from the love of God. We need to be aware of Satan. A church that sees is a church that sees the adversary, that recognizes that there is an adversary, and where God seeks love and peace and harmony and all the good that mankind can become. The devil seeks to sow discord and disharmony. And you can see that in some of the scriptures that we read earlier. In 14:2, the hard hearts, they stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brothers. There was division in 4. There's a plot to mistreat and stone God's servants in 5. There was idol worship in 13. And there was hatred for the Jews of Iconium in 19. You got a group that traveled. And we see travel as easy. You know, if I need to go to town, I just jump in the car to go to town. They made an effort to come to follow Paul and Barnabas, to stir up discord. Okay? They were so filled with hate for these two men and their message and the effect that they were having on the community that they traveled. They went out of their way to sow discord and to sow hate and to talk against Paul and Barnabas and their message. And that's just amazing to me. And we're told that we have an enemy. And we can expect persecution and hardship. Jesus told us that. Because of the commitment of how we live, it's going to cost. It's going to cost. It's not supposed to be easy, okay? As we live out His nature in the world, there's going to be a frontal assault of persecution. And we know that. Those are the easy things to see, you know. If someone scoffs at us or you know, you got those snide comments, or you got people on television that degrade your faith, that laugh and scoff at you know, even the existence of a God. Okay, and so there's sometimes that we don't see the adversary. Okay, we can see the impact of the adversary. Okay, we don't see the. It's not something we recognize, it's something we realize. Okay? It's not something we see, but we find it in our lives. Okay? Talking about discouragement and complaining and disagreement between the brothers. And just distractions that cloud our vision and make it hard for our hearts to be full of God's love and forgiveness. Okay? We call it human nature. We pass it off as a personality. We do all those things, but it's a. Everybody knows that Betty White had passed away. I heard one of her quotes this morning, and I don't know that she was a spiritual woman. I don't know that much about her. I do know that she always seemed to be a cheerful person, and one of the actors that used to work with her said, someone came up to her on set after, you know, during a break or whatever, and said, "You know what really gets my goat? You know what really makes me mad? Or you know what really, you know?" She says, "No, and I don't care." You know, and she would not allow that negativity to breach her happiness. Okay, so, you know, if you're bringing negative, she doesn't want it. She doesn't want to hear it, and she doesn't need it. And so, you know, that's the awareness we need to have of when the devil brings discouragement and disagreements and complaining and all those things. We don't need it. We don't need it. Because it's just a seed for something else to come. It's important that we are alert to the movements of the enemy. Okay, and it used to be there was a moral standing or a moral standard of the community that we would all get behind, whatever it may be. I remember miniskirts was a big thing. You know, we got, you know, well, it started before that, even miniskirts. You know, it was women wearing pants in the church. Okay, it was miniskirts. It was, and then it turned into things like, you know, the war and poverty and all of the things that, you know, there was a moral standard in the United States. There was a moral. We felt like there was a moral standard against certain lifestyles, against certain activities, against, you know, we had prohibition. You know, that was. We can look around us today and see that moral standard non-existent. It no longer exists in the United States as a oh, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, no longer exists in the United States we no longer have a moral compass. And so we need to be alert about our enemies. And we need to focus on the truth that Christ has overcome the world and all the nonsense that goes with it. Okay? And we've given, Christ gave us the answers to all those questions. Okay? We need to put on the full armor of God to help us overcome the world. We need to take up the shield of faith, which can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the world, evil one. Seeing our adversary is the first step. God has equipped us. And how do we do that? Okay? Encourage one another daily. If you've been discouraged, encourage another daily, as long as it's called today. Are we surrounded by complaining? Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. That's in Colossians. Is there a relationship that's full of disagreement and strife? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they be called the sons of God. God has a remedy for anything that the devil can throw at us. Okay? God has a remedy. God has a victory for us to experience. But we need to be aware of the enemy. We need to be aware that there's an enemy. And we need to see the lost. A church that has eyes for the lost is a church that is spreading the gospel. There's no other way around it. If you have eyes for the lost, people always ask me, not always, but have asked me about our preacher. And I always say he has a heart for souls. You know, that's one of the things I love about mine. He just has a heart for souls. And that's how we should be as a congregation. We should have a heart for souls. We should see and be looking for the lost. A church that sees uses bifocals. I cannot see. We have to remember that the world has a need for what we have, okay? And we need to be willing to share it. We need to actively look for opportunities to lift up Jesus in the way we live around our neighbors and our coworkers and our community. Looking like Jesus is not just our standard, okay? It's not our goal and what we have aimed to show the world. It's actively living out his nature and his character for the world to see. Every word we speak has a potential of echoing the voice of God. Our kindness, our joy, our love, our compassion, our purity, integrity, all of those things that we exhibit points the world to God. Not only points the world to God, but away from the destroyer. So learning to be a church that sees, learning to see. It seems like a simple statement. We have to open our eyes. We have to walk around with our eyes open. We have to be aware. We cannot allow our vision to be clouded with all the busyness of the world by our routine and apathy and all of those self-satisfying things that we live in and about every day. We need to have the faith and the open eyes of a little child, okay? A lost soul needs to give us that passion, just like every single school bus. Like the next lost soul needs to give us the passion of sharing Christ, just like the first one, okay? And it's something that we become. It's not something we are. It's something we work towards, and it's something we become with practice and help from each other, following good examples, and all of those things. Now, the enemy, the devil, he wants to devour our peace and our sense of mission and our hope He wants to take all those things from us. He wants to crush those things because he wants to win, and he's already lost. And we need to fix our eyes on the one who protects us from the enemy. When we see, we learn, and we know, and we recognize, and we're reminded that God is in charge. That's a powerful, powerful thing to have on the forefront of our mind. God is in charge. We need to look around the world through the eyes of God to see Him moving. We need to see the souls that He wants us to touch with His peace. We need to do the things that bring Him joy. Okay? And those things will align as we grow in Christ, as we grow. The things that bring us joy and the things that bring God joy will align. And so, seeing God allows us to surrender to His will and walk by His side and walk in His sight. Look at that. I did it. Thank you so much for your participation and your patience and your encouragement. And I think Mike will be back next week. I'm not sure. I got through all of that, and it only took me 5 weeks. It only took me 5 weeks. Thank you.
Good luck.